Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really dark, fascinating Arthurian psychodrama to explore something we've literally all experienced. We're talking about how we and the organizations we build react when faced with a massive, sudden void in leadership and meaning. Imagine the foundational structures of your everyday world just vanishing overnight. The king is gone, the rules have completely evaporated, and you're left standing in what the source material calls the permanent night. So, how do you respond?
Right, let's dive straight into this core philosophical conflict. What actually happens to our ambition when the safety nets just vanish? The source texts refer to those who fail this ultimate test as the higher men who had looked into the abyss and blinked. These are the architects of a fallen world, folks, who are entirely paralyzed by the sudden absence of authority. Let's jump into Section 1, the Vacant Throne, Leadership Voids and the Permanent Night.
Which brings us to Section 2, Stasis and Hollow Logic, featuring our first two archetypes, the Iron Sentry and the Last Thinker.
You know, when we're faced with chaos and a vacant throne, our first human instinct is rarely to innovate. Honestly, we usually just freeze, or we try to over-intellectualize everything. And what's absolutely fascinating here is how perfectly these mythological failures map directly onto the suffocating bureaucracy of modern corporate life. The Iron Sentry and the Last Thinker translate so seamlessly into the gatekeeping middle manager and the data-obsessed curator. I mean, we've all met an Iron Sentry in a Monday morning meeting, right? Because deep down, both of them are utterly terrified of the void.
Let's look a little closer at that first archetype. The Iron Sentry, sometimes called the Pale Inquisitor, stands at the Iron Bridge, and he's weighed down by this heavy armor of silver guilt. Because he simply cannot handle the fact that the throne is empty, he demands perfect stillness from everyone around him. He rigorously guards a process that literally no longer makes sense, actively punishing any kind of forward movement. And why? To mask his own secret shame and fear of the void. He isn't guarding a kingdom anymore, he's just guarding a hollow cage.
Meanwhile, across the courtyard, we have the Last Thinker. He's sitting in his glass library, acting like some kind of rogue Merlin. But instead of performing magic, he treats the tragedy of the void merely as a record, just something to be filed away into a silent ledger of nothingness. He views the noise of life, the messy, chaotic reality of trying to move forward, as a contagion. He would rather curate the complete extinction of his organization with perfect, sterile data than embrace a living, breathing mystery.
Moving on to Section 3, the Toxic Disruptor, the Tarantula Preacher's Web.
So, if bureaucratic stasis and analysis paralysis are the first traps, the second major trap is toxic disruption. Enter the tarantula preacher. This brings us to the parable of the equalizing web. The preacher covers the ruins of the Round Table in fine, sticky silk and calls out to the traveler, the silver wolf, to behold true equality. But the crucial point here is that he replaces the old honorable vows with what he calls the uncanny law. Under his rule, everyone is seated equidistant at the table, sure, but it's a trap. It's no longer a place for counsel, it's a circle for prey to gather. The only true justice to him is the hunger of the one sitting at the center of the web.
And to really understand his mindset, we have to look at the parable of the scraped shield. The preacher is found methodically scraping the gold leaf and heraldry right off his shield with a jagged stone. When asked why he's defacing his honor, he laughs with a silver tongue and says, "Honor is a ghost's garment, and the king is a ghost." He casts his shield into the shadows and literally declares, "I have traded the weight of a shield for the lightness of a fang."
This perfectly leads into the parable of the future's venom. While the inquisitor weeps for the past and the thinker indexes the present, the preacher offers the traveler a cup of shimmering venom. This is the future, he promises. He mocks the frozen laws and silent archives, offering pure revenge and atavism instead. But we've got to realize his so-called will to power is merely a will to undo. He wants to turn the future into a perpetual hunt where everyone eventually becomes a meal. A future built on hunger and toxic disruption is just as doomed as a past built on the Iron Sentry's guilt. So, what's the way out? That brings us to Section 4, Catalysts for Transformation, the Violet Knight and the Verdant Gavel.
How do we actually survive the permanent night? Well, in the deepest thickets, we find a true transformational leader, the Violet Knight. He wanders the ruins carrying a gavel that shimmers with a strange, bruised light. Unlike the architects of Dark Camelot who seek to freeze you in guilt or consume you in a web, the Violet Knight acts as a true catalyst. He seeks out those who looked into the abyss and blinked, aiming to bond them with a mythic nature spirit known as verdant life. This represents swamp fire, a completely active, living, transformative response to the void.
The parable of the verdant gavel outlines his fascinating process. First, he identifies the broken seeker wandering the sterile keep. Then, he raises his verdant gavel, and here's the wild part. It magically expands to match the exact immense spiritual weight of that seeker's despair. Finally, he strikes. But the blow doesn't kill the hero. It acts as a violent catalyst for the binding force of nature. This brilliantly illustrates the agile innovator's process, doesn't it? Taking the crushing weight of organizational despair and utilizing it as the very spark required for explosive growth.
Through this impact, the Holo Traveler is completely reborn. They are forcibly bonded with the Forest Guardian and transformed into a living pillar of swamp fire and growth. It's an incredibly powerful metaphor, proving that even in the absolute wreckage of our systems, we don't have to wait for a king to return. The spirit can find a way to burn with a light of its own making.
And that beautifully sets up Section 5, the Grave Dance Rebellion, an active response to the void.
This brings us to the ultimate climax, the parable of the heavy ground. Picture the travelers standing in the ruins, right in front of the vacant throne. On one side, the Iron Sentry's fear begs you to surrender to paralysis and guard a hollow cage. On the other side, the Tarantula Preacher emerges from the shadows, acting as the spirit of gravity. He whispers that the earth is for the predator and the prey, trying to snare the traveler's feet in sticky threads of resentment and bitterness. But the traveler chooses the grave dance. This rhythmic movement is an act of rebellion that transforms the very ruins of the world into a stage.
The grave dance is the ultimate rejection of those higher men who blanked. By literally leaping over the preacher's silk, the traveler refuses to be pulled down into the heavy soil of bitterness. Instead, they create meaning where absolutely none is handed to them. They turn the vacancy of the throne into an active stage for creation, moving powerfully toward a horizon that the old architects simply cannot reach.
Let's bring this all home with Section 6, claiming your own light, applying the parables to modern ambition. As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to look at what this rich, mythic journey means for our own careers and the structures we navigate every single day. The reality is, we've all encountered these archetypes. We've dealt with the sentries who paralyze progress with outdated rules. We've met the overthinkers who index our failures without ever actually trying to succeed. And we've for sure seen the toxic predators who use chaos as an excuse to build a web. But the true takeaway from the Violet Knight and the Grave Dancer is that a leadership vacuum is not a death sentence. It is an invitation. It's your opportunity to become a living pillar of growth and burn with a light of your own making.
So, I want to leave you with this thought to reflect on. The next time the structures around you fail, the next time you find yourself standing before your own vacant throne, which archetype will you embody? Are you going to guard a hollow cage, curate a ledger of nothingness, or build a predatory web? Or will you embrace the catalyst, ignite the swamp fire, and begin the grave dance? The choice of how you shape the permanent night is entirely yours.